Good morning, everyone. Really happy to be here. I'm really happy that you're here because it's pretty damn early. So yeah, get your coffees and drink up. And it's the first talk of the day, so it's not going to be massive. It's not going to be like very technical, which I guess is going to be good for you anyways. There's like few technical slides with some code, but it's Dagger. It's quite easy. You all know what you're doing there anyways. So today I'm going to talk about why we fail at modularizing our app. And the actual title is why we fail at modularizing Sky Sports, but I had some issues with the legal team. But the thing is, like, I work for Sky, I work on the Sky Sports team, so you're going to know this anyways. So as the title suggests, this is going to be a very honest retrospective. So I'm going to show you code that we don't have anymore. I'm going to show you code that might still exist in some places that I'm not particularly proud of, that I've written, that some of the people have written as well. And it's going to be, I think it's going to be good fun, because people usually like stories, and they like stories even more if they're about you. And if they're embarrassing, then they just like, it's pretty awesome for everyone. So, my name is Marcos. This is well, that's my Twitter handle there. And like I said, I work for Sky Sports on the Sky Sports and Sky News team. And I recently moved to another team called MySky, which basically they do like our customer app. And I want to start with this sentence that Voltaire said like quite a long time ago. So common sense is not that common. And this doesn't really mean that a lot of people lack common sense. It really means that common sense is based on human experience and perceptions. So what I think is common sense for me is probably not going to mean the same thing for you. So what it really means to us is that whatever I'm going to say here, it applies to us, and it might apply to you, but it might not, because there's a lot of different ways of modularization. Like you could take a clean architecture approach, or you could do something different. You could use dynamic feature modules. So take everything that I said. Don't take everything that I said for granted, basically. So let me explain how the app kind of like worked a few years ago. So we have one app, but we don't really support just one territory. So we support the UK, we support Germany, Italy, and a few other countries like Spain, Canada, United States, Australia, and for some reason, Nigeria. And you've probably seen a pattern here that I've been using different colors, and that is because we don't really have one app, we have multiple apps. And all these apps come from the same code base. And they are kind of similar, but they're not. They might share some features, but the actual implementation of some of those features is a bit different. They all have different backend services as well, and the theming is a little bit different. So how does this work? Or what we did like 3 years ago, which kind of strategy we were using? And the underwhelming answer is flavors. So in case if you don't know how this works, I'll just give you like a quick gist. So usually this is the structure that you have. You have your app module. Within that, you have a source package. And then you have your usual main package there. With flavors, we also add a new package for each flavor there. And if I zoom in a little bit and I get rid of some flavors, just to give you an example. So let's say that we only have UK and Germany. If I put a new feature in main, that means that it's going to be available for UK and Germany. And if I put that only in the UK, then it's not available for Germany. If I now wanted to change something that only applies to UK, then I have to change my feature. So now it's feature 1.1. And UK, it's fine, and it works. Everything's great. But I might have just broken Germany or any other flavors because they're all sharing the same part of the code. And maybe I didn't know that Germany was using that feature. So a real example of this is, what, 2017? Yeah. So this is something that I fixed a while ago. And it's basically someone changed a color in Germany, and that changed the color in UK, so broke the whole thing. And the word again there should already tell you that there's something very wrong going on here. But what's even funnier is that not even a week later, we had the exact same bug regressed. And if you're thinking, Marcos, why you didn't write a test? We'll come back to testing later on, because it's quite interesting as well. So this obviously had a lot of issues, like long build times, because flavors. You could change one thing in main, and you could break like many different stuff. It was very, very painful to work with, not just for us, but for manual testers. Like if you're a tester, and I change something in main, that means that they're probably going to have to test every single flavor that we have. So it's very painful, and obviously it doesn't really scale. And once you are in that situation, you kind of need to do something which is very difficult. You need to convince people, because you need to say, hey, we really need to change the way that we work. This doesn't scale. This doesn't work anymore. And convincing people is very hard. And so you go to your team and you talk to them and say, hey, I really think that we're doing something wrong. We need to change this. And they probably agree with you because they're suffering as well. What is very tricky and what is very hard is convincing people that are not in your team. And these are the people that actually end up paying for everything that you do. Because modularizing is not free. Right, refactoring is not free. If you want to rewrite your app, which probably shouldn't do anyways, it's not free. Someone has to pay for that. And you need to convince someone to give you the money to do it, especially in like a big company like Sky. So it was very interesting just putting the salesman hat on to just go to the upper levels like heads of technologies and heads of products and things like that to say, hey, we actually need money to do this, and we need to spend time. And yeah, you could do that a little bit on the back without telling anyone, but it's going to take you ages. So with all this in mind, I think it took me probably a year to convince someone that we should be doing this and to actually get the money. And the way this worked is that I had to sell them an idea. And they quite liked the idea. Actually, it kind of like came from them. So introducing what they call the vision, because obviously you always need the vision, right? And what this vision was, and there was also the concept of something called showcase app, which again, I'll come back to that later. So this whole vision was, hey, can you just build a website and where I can go and just pick and mix all the different features that we have available, and then you click a button and just create a new app? So that's what they wanted us to do, and that's what they were thinking they were giving us the money for. Obviously, we didn't do it, because I mean, it doesn't make any sense, really. So what we did instead to prove them that, yeah, we might be able to do something like that if you give us the money, we built a plugin for Android Studio. We built like a few templates. It wasn't really just smoke and mirrors. It was actually working. So with the plugin, you created a new app that was creating all the basic structure. And then you could just pick different features. So you had the toolbar where you can select like an image or different colors, a logo. You could pick an article list feature, and I will just put that list right there without you having to do any coding. And then on top of that, you could add, I don't know, like a video carousel or any other features. So this brought us to a quite interesting question, which is what really is a module? Like, how do you define what a module is? And I think for us it was kind of simple, because we knew that we wanted to share features. So it kind of like made sense to have two different types of modules. So we ended up with feature modules, which are just features, and then core, because everyone needs core, right? So I'm just going to focus now on feature modules. So for us, a feature module is a black box that you shouldn't really be able to change. and it has a set of inputs and outputs. And also, because our features don't usually work the same way for every single app, we also have listeners or callbacks or whatever you want to call it, really. And this is how it looks if you put the app together. So the app sends a bunch of inputs. It gets an output, which could be like a fragment. It could be an activity. And then implements the listeners. So now the question was, all right, so we know what is a module, but what is a feature? And this might look like a very simple question, but it really wasn't. So if I go back to the previous kind of like schema here, and I change this black box with the article list feature, it's kind of obvious that we're going to have an article list activity. But if you start thinking about this, you know that when the user clicks on an article, you want to take the user to maybe, I don't know, maybe a web view so they can read the article. And where do you put that web view? Like, do you think the web view is part of that feature? Because it could be there, but maybe it's not. Maybe that should be a different feature. And the thing that your app really has to do is implement that click listener there, and then just take the user to the reader module. And this is a very simple example, and it looks like that it makes sense, because maybe you don't have an article list. Maybe you just have a list of things, and one of those things could be a video. So then you want to take the user to a different place. So I'm going to tell you the story of our first module and why this wasn't that simple decision for us. So this is how our app looked like back in the day. So just like a single app with a lot of features that we have in separate packages. And we had this one called streaming. And this is the first one that we picked. And it was completely out of necessity. It's because we had to do it. We had to release a new app. We had a hard deadline. And for legal reasons, we had to remove that feature. And obviously, it was tightly coupled, so it looked like a very good opportunity to start modularizing. So we did that. That's what we created a new module with that. The problem is that it was very, very tightly coupled to another section of the app, which is the live TV section. So you can just go there and see all the channels that you can stream, and just click, and that should take you to the streaming. And we had to decide, like, what do we do? Do we separate that in a different module, or do we keep them together? And we kept them together. Like 2 years later, still massively regretting that decision. But again, the problem here is that we're dealing with a very, very complicated feature, something that was done quite a while ago before any of us were there. So we didn't really understand the way it worked. And we had a hard deadline, so we couldn't spend 3 months just doing it. And it was mainly done by one person. That was a big, big mistake. Just don't do it. And so we're trying to create our first module. We should be setting the example for the ones to come. And we were rushing it. We didn't know what we were doing. And obviously, it was a very, very bad first example. And pretty much immediately, not even a month after getting this module and then releasing the app, and I mean, everything worked. But not even a month later, is when I really started to look into modularization. And this is where I started. And it was painful. It was very, very painful. So maybe you're thinking, well, if it's too complicated, just start with the easiest one. And that's what I did. I thought, I'm just going to start with the easiest module ever. So everyone is going to be able to understand what it does, and it's going to be great. And I picked the easiest one. I picked the splash screen, because there's nothing easier than a splash screen. Big mistake, because it's so simple that it doesn't have any value. It doesn't add anything to it. It's already working. It's very, very simple. Why touching something that works? Why starting with something that doesn't even have any interfaces. It doesn't do anything. It's just a splash screen. So maybe rather than starting with the most simple, just start with the most valuable. What is that feature that's going to give you the most value of all of those features? And this is very easy to sell to product, because you can say, hey, I want to modularize this feature here, because it's really complicated to integrate with whenever we create a new app. And it's very hard to work with that. And plus, we can fix a lot of bugs. And they're going to love it. They're definitely going to love that. If you say, hey, I have a new splash screen, and they are like, yeah, what does it do? Oh, it's just a splash screen. They're not going to like it. And of course, integrate those modules as soon as possible. There is nothing worse than having 7 modules that you're not really using, because that's just like time wasted. And it's not going to be nice. It's not going to be pretty at the beginning. We renovated our bathroom last year, and this is how it looks like now. Like mind the gap on the floor there, which is fixed. But to get to this point, we had to go through hell before, and it's going to be very, very similar with this. Like you're writing your first module, it's going to be a bit hacky, and to integrate that in your app, it's not going to feel great. But I think like as long as all that hackiness and ugliness happens in your app, I think you're going to be fine. And you can use feature toggles. You can use a lot of different practices to make this a little bit better. And I know what I'm saying sounds really bad, because I'm saying just put something hacky on your app and everything will be fine. But what you don't really want to do is compromise your modules. You don't want to have the hackiness in your new module, because that should be the standard to follow. So there is no point on adding anything that's hacky that you might think, yeah, I'll remove that in a few months, because let's be honest, you're not going to do it. So integrate as soon as possible. Very, very important lesson for us. And I mean, I kid you not, I definitely have had 4 or 5 modules that have been there without anyone using them for a long time. And you see them, and it's like, what's the point of doing this? So I guess now is a good time to talk about our favorite topic in this community, which is dependency injection. So back to the streaming example. So we have the player, we have the like TV section, and we have a core module. So the app depends on core. Your new module depends on core, because like I said, everyone needs core. And then the app also depends on streaming. And now let's say that you need a user in streaming, right? So you need a user there, and there's already a user in your app. So you basically now add kind of like a dependency from the module to the app, because the app has to fulfill that user. It has to pass an object user across. So we were using Dagger before. We had quite a very simple approach. We had a main component with a few modules, and then each feature package had a subcomponent, and that worked really well. So I guess the question was, could we still do something with Dagger? And I'm just going to answer this question right now. So hey, I'm going to tell you what to use. Use whatever works for you. Like, it doesn't really matter. Use Dagger if you want to use Dagger. Use Coin if you want to use Coin. I particularly don't mind. Like I said, I moved recently to a new team, and we're building a new app from the ground up. And one of the questions was, do we use Dagger or do we use Coin? And I said, I don't care. But if you don't want to understand how something works, then just don't use it. So if you don't really want to dig into how Dagger works, let's go with Coin. Or the other way, if you don't want to know how Coin works, then let's use Dagger. And the reality is that forget about TDD, forget about PDD, we really do SOD. And this is a real concept. This is Stack Overflow-driven development. And let's say you want to use Dagger, but you don't really know how it works. So what you do is you go to Stack Overflow, you copy-paste some random answer, you paste that in a place that you don't even know if it belongs there, and then maybe it works, but a month later, you have a bug, and you don't know where that's coming from, and it's a nightmare. So if you're going to use Dagger, understand what it does. And if you're going to use Coin, understand what it does. Because otherwise, there is no point. And so after the streaming kind of like fiasco, I'm going to show you like real code that we had. So these are some snippets of our Dagger implementation right after we got this streaming module. And this worked, by the way. So let's have a look at this. So what is this? So this is a provider. And you can see that it uses this singleton scope there. But of course, whoever did this didn't really trust Dagger. So he had to use like an atomic reference and actually have its own implementation of singleton, because scopes don't really do that, right? So what is this one? So here we're injecting a utility class, but yeah, we have to check if it wasn't null before, because then what's the point on doing it? Because Dagger obviously doesn't do that for you. And this is my favorite. If you were wondering, what is this streaming module main thing? You're in for a treat. So this is something that implements this module main interface. And I'm going to go deeper. What is module helper? So module helper is this interface here. And it has like a core component, which is in core. And I'm just going to stop here, because I don't want to see you suffer like I did. Because I could go on with this base nav object register, and honestly, it doesn't make any sense. This was madness. And this was all because the person who wrote this code, and because the rest of the team, really, we were rushing. We really didn't care enough. We should have cared more. We should have dug into what Dagger was doing. And we were using subcomponents, and we thought, let's keep using them. And that has a few issues. So here we have an app with the component, and then we have a streaming module with a subcomponent. So the app has a reference to the streaming component, which means that it depends on the streaming module. And that's fine, because that's the way that the dependencies should go. But if now we look at an activity inside the streaming module, we have now a reference to the app component. So now what we have is a dependency going upwards, and now we have a cyclic dependency. And that's one of the problems with subcomponents in this world. So just don't use them. So instead of this, and after, I think it was like good 2-3 months of refactoring everything that was done there, we ended up with something like this. So now our components just depend on other components. So this is our streaming component, which depends on the core, which is in core. And then we have the way we create them is by using these interfaces. So each component, each of these main components, because we have more than don't really use those interfaces, this is the way that we create them. So we implement these interfaces in our application, and this is how it works. It's kind of simple. I mean, and you can see it's Java, so this was probably maybe like 2 years old. So you just create a component, and then you always return the same component. And in the UK, which is the place that we only need the streaming component, extends from the normal application. And we just create the streaming component the same way that we did with the other two. But because we are extending from the Sky Sports application, we also have access to the core component, which we need because it's a dependency. And we also have access to the app component, which has the user that we needed to pass. And then in the activity, we have this helper, which just needs an application context. And the only thing that the helper does is check if that context actually implements those interfaces, and then just call them. So again, use whatever you want, but just understand what you're doing and share the knowledge. Because if you do something and no one understands what you're doing, then there is no point in doing it, really. Which kind of like brings me to another very important thing, which is just always follow the case principle, which you all know that keep it simple, stupid. And I know, and I've met a lot of very, very smart people that do very crazy things that no one is able to understand. So if you really think that you're too smart to fail, that there is no way that whichever code that you write is going to be wrong, I'll say think that again, because if the team can understand what you're doing, then you already failed. So I'll show you more examples with overcomplicating things. This is something that I wrote when into map was introduced. Can't remember, I think 2.3 maybe in Dagger. So the only thing that I'm doing here, and I shouldn't say the only thing because that assumes that you all know what I'm going to say, is so I just put a bunch of factories in a map, and then I have a key there, and then I'm injecting those factories, and then I think I was using them in an adapter. And this is all right, and that looked good for me, but arguably, this does the same thing, and maybe it's a bit more readable. And there's a very blurry line here, because these two approaches, you can argue that, yeah, are quite similar, and there's no like a big difference. But let me show you this. Our app has a config JSON file that we download for different things. It's probably 20 lines of JSON. It's not a lot. So this was the actual implementation at one point. So what do we do here? We have a config class, and it has a map of strings and config sections. And a config section is this interface. And if you wanted to use this, you had to create a deserializer. And to create a deserializer here, you can see on the map that you need a bunch of config section deserializers, whatever that is. So config section deserializer is this very nice interface that you can see here. So as an example, if we have a force upgrade section, this is what you had to do. So you create your force upgrade deserializer, which implements the config section deserializer, which needs a section. In this case, we call that force upgrade. And then this is force upgrade. So implements the config section that I showed you before. And honestly, if at this point you're not lost and you're not thinking this is mental, it's probably because you wrote it. So don't overcomplicate things. I look at this, and I couldn't figure out why it was so complicated. So this is actually my commit message on the day. And it was so good that I had to share that, because I deleted like almost 2,800 things just to map a JSON into an object. It's just crazy. It doesn't make any sense. So don't put things that you don't really do. Don't overcomplicate things. Don't overkill. And maybe that means asking questions like, do you really need a core module? And you probably do, but it's very easy to load it up with things that don't belong there or that you don't need. So back to the streaming example there. So we have this user class in two different places. So what do we do with this? I mean, it's quite simple. I just put that in core because everyone depends on core. But what happens if you then have another module that also depends on core and it doesn't really need that? Why this module has to have access to that user? What about other libraries? Because a user is kind of like straightforward, but you might have things that probably shouldn't be sharing. And then at this point, you could think, all right, I'll just put that in a different module. So now you have a user module which only has a user class. And it might work, but again, you're just creating like a lot of modules with single classes, and again, it's so easy to blow this thing up. So maybe instead, what you really need is say, I don't really need a user in streaming. What I need is a specific implementation of that user. I need a streaming user. And then the app is responsible to fulfill that dependency. So it will transform that user into a streaming user. And now you don't have that user in core, and you don't have that user on its own module. And what helped a lot was treating each module as if it was a library that you wanted to open source. And And I think getting into this mindset can fix a lot of these issues, because you can't just say, well, I put this in core. What is core? If you're working on an open source library, you don't really have that. But again, maybe this doesn't really apply to you, because maybe you don't really need to share features. So again, be careful with what you do. And just don't blow up things like core, and don't create just modules for the sake of it. There's probably like better things and better approaches. Which brings me back to testing. I said I was going to talk about this, although it's painful. And I said I was going to talk again about Showcase app. This Showcase app is something fascinating. I don't even know why I did this. The whole idea that someone else higher up wanted to do is, I want to be able to go to all the product owners, and I just want to showcase them every single thing that we can do. So they had this brilliant idea of having a Showcase app with all our features, with all our different possibilities and capabilities that you could do. And what's even better was the idea of, what if we just do all our implementation tests there? Because that should be quite simple. It's just one app rather than 4 or 5. So yeah, no. It doesn't make any sense. So think about this, right? Think that you have all these features. Think about, I don't know, 5 random libraries. I don't even care which libraries. Try to put all those libraries in one app. Try to implement every single feature and every single possibility that you can do with those libraries. Put that in an app, make that configurable, and write tests for it. It doesn't really work. And obviously, we scrap this thing. But the problem is that we spend so much time trying to think how to do it, like doing spikes and actually writing the Showcase app, which I think just 2 features. And it was a nightmare. And it took us way more time that I would have liked to just say, no, this doesn't work. Just because of that separation and that difficulty of convincing people that it's not on your team. So what we have now is we just have a sample app. We have a sample app per each feature module that we have. And that way we can just test that feature in isolation. We don't have to worry about putting that feature to test it in the app, because like I said, it could be hacky. And then rather than thinking on a good implementation of the feature, maybe you are thinking about how can I sneak this in the app in an easiest way. So this helped a lot. And it kind of looked like this. And it's just very, very helpful to keep all the modules decoupled, and it works really, really great. Fun story, the iOS team was already doing this. They didn't even try to do the Showcase app. Should have heard them. Another issue that you probably could have are resource conflicts. And this kind of like goes back to the first kind of like commit message with the colors and things like that. So this is the typical thing where you're using like a third-party library or something that is using a resource that's been named with a very, very common name that you might already have in your app. So if we have our app, and then we have core, and we have streaming, and we have this string called test in streaming, then we run this code, and then it's going to show my test because there's nothing else. If we now put another string with the same name in core, and we run this again, now it's going to change. So it's going to be using core test. And the question is, why is using core test? Why is not using the other one? It's not just because we just put that there. It's because the order of your dependencies matter for this. So it's going to always be using the top dependency that you have. So if I swap them and run this again, now it's going back to my test. But obviously, you don't want to rely on that because it doesn't make any sense. And then if you put that on your app, then, it doesn't really matter anything else that you put there. So one way to avoid this is just, don't write duplicated resources with the same name, but that is probably a difficult thing to do. So just prefix all just resources from, I don't know, with the name of your module, for instance. And And again, you might forget about that, so there is a really nice way to do it. So on your properties in Gradle, in the Android section, you can just use resource prefix, and then just write the prefix that you want to use there. And what that is going to do is that lint now is going to give you an error every time you forget to add that prefix there. And this is very, very handy. And to finish off, just like a small thing that maybe some of you know, maybe you don't, but I thought this was quite interesting. So you can have scopes in Android Studio. So the way this works is that you go to Preferences, and under Appearance and Behavior, you have scopes. So there you can create a new scope. You put a pattern, kind of like a regular expression, with the files that you want to include there. And then if you go to the project viewer here, where you can change the type of view, and you can now see that specific scope that you just created. And what it's going to do is it's going to declutter your whole project view and only going to show you the specific files that you have there. So just to quickly recap, I think like the biggest 3 takeaways for me was realizing that in our case, when you have features that you want to share, and when you even want to change some of the implementations of those features in some cases, that the app is what holds everything together. So you want to move all that to the app. So don't try to say, well, my module can do 3 different things depending on the app that is using it. So I'll just put, I don't know, an int there. So if it's 0, it will do something. If it's 1, it will do something else. I just create an interface and implement that on your app. And because then it doesn't scale. If you want to add a 4th behavior, now you have another number to take care of. Treat your feature modules as if there were libraries that you wanted to open source. That definitely helped a lot as well. And just, I got this quote from John O'Reilly, an Android dev from Cisco a while ago, and it's just so good. I couldn't agree more. Like, everything should be as simple as possible, but not simpler. We tend to overcomplicate things, and that's why we usually end up in those kind of situations where everything is you can't really understand what's going on, and the rest of the team don't understand what's going on. And people, what they really do is like, well, I don't even want to touch streaming anymore. And I had that where people is like, well, you can do it. I don't even want to look at that code. And it's very difficult to switch that mindset. And that was pretty much everything. So yeah, for a lot of reasons, like many people seem to veer towards adding unnecessary complexity very often. So try not to do it. And it's hard, but it's definitely worth it. And the last thing that I want to say is, I like speaking in public and things like that. I have no problem with that, but I'm actually extremely shy and introvert. So if you're like me and you really want to ask me a question and you don't really know how to come to me and ask something, I have a lot of these candies. They're called Chupa Chups. You probably know them. So as an icebreaker, you can just come to me and say, hey, Marcos, can I have a candy? And I'll give you a candy. And then we start a conversation. Now, I know that you probably shouldn't trust people that gives candies for free. But I guess you can definitely trust me. So these are like some stuff there. That's my kind of like a Dagger playground repo that I have with some examples with modularization. There's like a few blog posts I wrote, and you can find the slides there as well for this talk. Thank you very much.